Just a quick question when we start. Did anyone visit Notre Dame before the fire? Okay, that's about 10 to go on the list of potential. Okay, right. So today I'm going to be talking or sharing some of my experiences about the work that happened on Notre Dame with the carpentry of Notre Dame and what we can learn about it. But first, before I get too much into this, I think it's really useful to look at how it's possible to actually get into this type of carpentry, because I know it's a question that I get asked a lot. I've got my volunteer with the slide. Next. Yes, it's great. Thank you. So that's me without beard. So this is Notre Dame a while ago. Now, I'm going to admit that I should start with, my name is Mike Dennis and I'm a workaholic. Because I live carpentry, all I do is carpentry. In my spare time, I'm redoing my house, a medieval house, that's carpentry. All my money goes on tools, that's carpentry. All my spare time, this is my girlfriend here, and actually, no, but this is a date. This for a carpenter is the height of romance. I mate next, please. I also might have a slight obsession with axes, and if I wave this up in the air, and if anyone can tell me they don't like the speech, then okay. So next slide, please. Okay, so I started probably about 15 years ago, and I started with, here he is, this chap here, Alan Ritchie. Alan is a local character. He is a timber framer and an amazing guy, and he taught me all that I know today. And in fact, this photo is, I stole it off his website this morning, and if we've got a guy up here, and he was my tutor at college. Timber framing or traditional carpentry is a craft that at that time in particular was really hard to get into, and it was so hard to get into and get qualifications. I ended up first going to a normal college in Bristol, and I was learning standard house bashing carpentry, and there was a real disconnect. So I would walk into Bristol and I would look at these houses that were absolutely amazing. They'd been there for 500-600 years or more. And then I looked at what we were doing now, and there was such a difference in the quality, the standard, everything. And so I ended up looking at how could I learn about this. I had a week to spare and there was one place on this course. So I jumped on the course, and this is quite funny that this photo was taken a few years later, and it came time for my assessor at college to come and assess my carpentry. It was so new for them at that point. They sent my assessor on the course that I was helping to teach, so I could teach him how to assess me. Okay, next photo, please. Okay, there did come a point that I noticed. So it was a traditional apprenticeship that I started on. So I must have done something right. On this course, about 3 days in, Alan took me to one side and said, "Look, what are you doing next week? Could you come and give me a hand?" And of course, I bit his arm off. And I was working for free. I was getting accommodation and skill and my labour. And there's so little money in it at that time. As an apprentice, you cost so much money that it's really difficult for anyone to take someone on. So there was an exchange that was going on. But But I did notice that as my skill was improving, my bank balance was looking very, very sad. And that's when they're here today. There's Mark and Jen. Are you here? Are you in here today? Are you in here now? Okay. So there's a couple walking around. They had a down-to-earth project, and we were just doing a little timber frame there. We put this little frame up, and they said, look, we chase grants all the time, and then there is this grant you probably haven't heard of. Go for it. And I phoned them up, and it was the Traditional Building Skills Bursary Scheme. And they were amazed that someone was doing this, and it was because of them they gave me enough funding to get through the next year. And honestly, if it wasn't for that funding, I wouldn't have been involved in Notre Dame. I probably wouldn't have been a carpenter. I wouldn't have been able to go around the world, and I wouldn't have been able to pass those skills on to the people I have been passed. So I think if anyone here is into that kind of sector of society or the building skills, just to show the importance of these things, that they are so incredibly important. Okay, next please. Okay, so a few years later I got involved with some really interesting project. I've always had a really horrible itch. The doctors told me it's nothing to worry about. It's just a travelling itch. And I ended up looking at all the skills I could travel the world with, and it was carpentry that helped me to travel. And it got me over here on the far left. That's in Canada. This is called the Kinsale Trestle Bridge. It's a huge wooden-built bridge where the railways would come over. They'd be transporting timber and all other supplies on Vancouver Island. It got in such disrepair that they would the train would go across and everyone would jump off the train and they'd wait to see if it got to the other side before they ran after it and jumped back on again. And at some point it burnt down and we ended up working on this. And this was my first work into industrial carpentry, and it involved dangling off a rope with a chainsaw 100 foot up in the air, and it was quite an experience. But this got me into this community of amazing people. And then a few years later, I kind of combined my interests. I've always had a fascination with China as well. And I ended up going with the Carpenters Fellowship to China with a group called Charpentiers Sans Frontières, Carpenters Without Borders. And this is really important for Notre Dame, this organisation. We've got a guy here in yellow. He is François Calam. Absolutely amazing individual. And this is the little heritage centre that we were building in the middle of China. Absolutely incredible. Okay, next please. Okay, I don't know if anyone remembers this. Okay, this was 2019 and the whole world would see. We had this is a few reports. We've got the BBC, CNN, and this is one in China as well, the People's Daily. And, it was an absolute, it was a devastating event for a lot of people around the world. Okay, next please. Now, a few of you might have seen this. Of course, there was an outpouring of grief all over the world, and there were a lot of architects who came together and thinking, right, what can we do? How can we restore this building? And there was even this suggestion, which was, and this isn't a joke, this was a real company with a real suggestion that suggested a swimming pool instead of a roof on the top of Notre Dame de Paris. Okay, next one, please. So, here we are, 2020, the beginning of, I dare mention the pandemic. But just before we're all totally locked down, François Calam, he saw what was happening here. He got a group of people together. He got 25 of us together, and over 10 days, just using hand tools, we made truss number 7 of the nave. And this was really to show the world that we have the skills possible. Not only that, we have the timber available, because these are amazing timbers that we required. And we have the know-how and the people who can do it. And I think this, in fact, I know this, having talked to the architects and people involved, this event was critical in demonstrating that we could uphold those international agreements on heritage, that we could restore Notre Dame as was found, as was done in the 13th century. Okay, next please. So here we are. This is the workshop. So we're starting to get into it. This is 2022, December, and the timbers had arrived at the workshop, and these are some of the tie beams. I have never seen timber like this. It is absolutely incredible. These timbers here are more than 15 meters long. That's about the length of this tent here. And hewing these with the axe, I remember hewing two sides of one of these and not finding a single knot. And if you can imagine the trees, they were just for a carpenter, it's a dream. Once in a lifetime. I mean, saying once in a lifetime, last week I hewed one that was 20 meters without a knot as well, but that's another story about Viking ships. This is a really good one just for people who aren't familiar with the process of converting timber as they did in the 13th century. You have this guy, you have Matthias up there. He's making notches. So he would make a V in the timber, and then with the same axe, he'd slice down and he'd take those pieces of timber off. And then after that, you're left with a rough surface. And it's after that you come with a finishing axe, like one of these here, which is, this one's a single bevel, so it's really like a big chisel. So you're almost planing that surface with an axe. Okay, next please. Okay, we have to mention, every time we think about this carpentry, we think about the real action that's happening here. The axes, that's what the cameras really love. And all the good-looking, strapping young guys and gorgeous girls who are doing this carpentry. They didn't video me in most of the carpentry, I must admit. But we should always remember what happened before. It starts in the forest, and it starts hundreds of years ago, planting these trees. Now so I worked at Atelier Desmonts, so the workshop Desmonts, and we made the nave. And I'll be concentrating on the nave. The other workshop near Angers in Paris, they made the choir. They're called Perrault. And the timber that we had at our workshop in Normandy, it all came from about 2 hours drive. Again, people were worried that we didn't have that timber, but we did have that timber, and it was really close to the workshop. And we had people like Lou and Rémi who would work with the ONF, who were the National Department of Forests, Office National des Forêts, so like the Forestry Commission in France. And they would work really close together, and the carpenters would go out with the foresters, and you'd go in the forest and they'd be looking at trees. And we'd be looking for quite slim, very straight trees, more like what we have with a medieval forest. A bit different to what we normally have now, where we want really big trees, where we can make barrels, and we have all our big sawmills and big technology that can really manage and process those. But back in the medieval period, you don't want huge trees. You want to take the minimum amount of material off as possible. It's a lot of effort, and in the medieval period, a lot of that expense came from moving that timber as well. So if you can bring that down, it's fantastic. Now we would go out and we'd see timbers, and sometimes we'd see timbers and, you know, Lou would say to the forester, she'd say, "That timber is amazing, can we have that?" And the forester would say, "No," because it was a consideration about the forest. They'd be looking at the forest saying, for the long-term health of the forest, we need that tree to stay. And as carpenters, we totally respect that. There was never an argument. It is always, right, let's find another tree. And so rather than cutting all those trees down in one fell swoop, no, there was no clear cutting. It was very, very careful selection of timber. And, you know, even though we used over 1,000 trees in the nave alone, compared to the amount of trees that get cut down in France, it was 0.00 something percent of those trees. It ended up as a tiny amount, because what we do use was used very economically. Okay, next please. Okay, so we were really lucky on the project. This is the top of the truss. It was finished. We'll get to that later. But we had this guy, Rémi Fremont, and we had Cédric Tronceau. They were architects, and Cédric was the head architect of this of this project. What was really lucky is that in 2014, the two of them and a couple of other colleagues, they went into the nave and they did a study. He did a study for his doctorate. So he was able to take that information and all the photos that he'd had and apply that. And honestly, if he hadn't have done that study, it would have been a very different project. It was already difficult, but, you know, very different. Okay, next please. So these might be quite interesting. We had the dendrochronologists. Now, come and visit us. Now, a dendrochronologist is someone who looks at tree rings. They're even more obsessed with trees than I am. They will look at the tree rings, and I don't know if you can see here, but all the tree rings, the spacing is different. And because of that, they can tell you a lot about the trees. They can tell you, like we have wide rings here, they can tell when the tree started growing, it was quite an open forest. And then as the canopy got close, greened up, these rings were starting to get closer as the tree was starting to slow down in its growth. But they can look at the charts and they can tell you, because weather is different from every year to year, they can tell you how old that tree was, when it was felled, and if you have the sap, you can see if it was felled in the summer or even the winter. Now, this is one of the pieces out of Notre Dame, and you can see the charring on here. Now, this apparently had been charred at least a couple of inches, and I don't know if you can see here, can you see that silver? It's in there. As the fire raged through the building, the lead roof melted, and that lead melted down onto the timbers, and this is some of the lead that fell and seeped into the fissures. And then we've got very few remains of the carpentry as well. This is a tenon, you can see the burn marks on the side, and we've got a wedge here, but every tiny bit of information for us was absolutely critical, was so important. Okay, next. So this is the inside of Notre Dame before the fire. It's an absolutely amazing piece of carpentry. Working on it, you start to better understand how incredible it was. The quality of workmanship was through the roof. The quality of hewing was absolutely phenomenal. The carpentry was amazing. And then you get to see all the repairs over time as well. You get to see the repairs in later in the 13th century. You have these pieces, which in French is a hanging needle, and they were put in later to support the walkway later in the 13th century. So you get to see all of this. And next. And of the few bits we had, and with the photos as well, we could actually see the evidence of the tools that were used by the carpenters to make this building. And you can see the ripples in here, and these are the axe marks from the hewing process. And you can just see, maybe not at the back, but there are some scratches down here. Now, when you're working, if you hit a knot or a piece of metal in a wood, you get a little nick in your blade. You know, you do your best to get them out. But when you're working with that tool, before that nick is fully out, every time you cut, you leave a little trace. And that's a signature of an axe. And if any of you live in an old building or visit an old building, if you go to that old building, you will be able to see those traces. And sometimes you can go in a building and you can see this one trace is similar to that, a beam in the same building in a different part. So you can see the same axe was used in the same place. It's a little bit nerdy, and people will understand if you stand there staring and with your torch looking for all the marks. Okay, next. Nay understands. She has to deal with that a lot. So as part of the ongoing research, when we were in the project, you know, it's a very fast process. We never have enough information. And we had, before the project started, we were really fortunate to have a bunch of axes made for the project. And as the project went on, again, being a bit nerdy, as if working all day long wasn't enough, in the weekends and the evenings I would sit down and I'd nerd out about looking at all the old images, and looking at all the dated images and depictions of carpenters and their tools, we were able to find out what tools they were actually using. Now, our axes, which were made for the project, were more like a 14th or a 15th century axe, and I found this depiction here, and I think this is what the blacksmith copied the blade for. It's an amazing depiction, absolutely incredible axe. And here's our model, Alan the Thatcher, who sat at the front, modelling that. And if you look really closely, you can see the similarities. You'll see the curve of the blade is the same, the form is the same, the beard is the same, the hair is the same. And I think it might actually be the same person. So when we look at the 13th century, though, we see an earlier form of axe. We see this if you can see, it's got two very distinct halves. It's a very kind of squarish shape with little wings on. And we're very lucky because with religious depictions, of course, we have Noah, we have Joseph, and all of these things working with their axes. But we also have other tools. We find saws, adzes, hammers, and we saw evidence of all of these tools in the building from just looking at the photos. And adzes, for example, we could see how they were used in sculpting. You know, they weren't really used for hewing, but for sculpting the details in a building. They're absolutely fantastic. Saws, we start to see saw marks as well, which we'll see in a minute. But these sources were absolutely amazing and so helpful for us. Next slide, please. So, these are the trusses that we had to make. And you look at this project and think, brilliant, a roof, let's get on with it. And it's not until you see how big these things are, but not just that, how many there are. And we had principal trusses, the main truss, and these would tie the walls together, and in between each of those we would have 4 secondary trusses as well. And these things are massive, you know, they're spanning almost 15 metres. It's just a feat of wonder. And I mean, these are all the terms that as the foreign carpenters, we had to memorize during the making of this. That which blew my mind anyway. And so we had in total about 55 trusses. We had 11 principals, and between each of those 4, so about 44 secondaries. And each of them the secondary trusses would take about 3 to 4 days each, and the principal trusses could take a month. Next, please. 5 minutes. Oh, crikey. Okay. So, how to understand how to do this, we made prototypes. So this is a little prototype we made, looking at all the different marks of the timber and trying to reproduce these. And each of these limbs on here is different, looking at all the proportions on how to do that, but also the tools. And using different tools for each of these, it was really good with Remy Fremont, the architect who'd seen it. He could come in and he could see it and feel it and go, yeah, this is the one. This is how we think they did it. Next. So this is one of the trusses being built, and medieval carpentry like this is kind of like medieval flat pack. So you build it in one place and then you dismantle it and put it up in another. And here we have 4 of our American carpenters working in a truss, and we ended up an international team. We combining French, English and American styles of timber framing to come up with the best way to reproduce these trusses. Next, please. And here's, just to get the scale of it, here's one of the trusses with a few of the team. Absolutely wonderful team, but you can see, these just long, straight pieces of timber. That's absolutely, I would bore you to death for hours about how this actually works. It's just mind-blowing. Next, please. But apparently I only have 5 minutes, so I'm not allowed to. So here's just again to get that scale of the trusses. So to store these, we stored them upright. And that meant, because we're working with green timber, as everything dries out, it dries out together. So those joints stay really tight. Everything stays really good. And we can guarantee as well, because we've already had it up, that everything will fit. And because we also have to accommodate the fact that this building, it's not straight. The walls are curving. The walls are also getting wider. The walls are also, one side is doing this, the other side is doing that. And as you get down to the bell tower, the pitch is getting, I think it's less as well. So each and everything just make it so much more challenging. Next, please. So this is the view. This is the topping out ceremony that we had. There's lots of images if you look on the internet from the other way. But yeah, it took about 5 months for a crew to use cranes to take all of these trusses up and to put them in place. Next, please. Now, my question is this. What if? Imagine 2025. I don't want to be Nostradamus here. Please don't prove me right. 2025, beautiful summer afternoon, and you wake up to the news and you see St. David's in flames. What if this happened? It's a gem in Wales. Incredible 16th century carpentry. Okay, next, please. Is it even possible? We've been lucky to have with people, Tim Potts, who's an amazing character, has done a study on the carpentry through the Carpenters Fellowship. Laurie Smith, who sadly passed away, incredible man. Did a study on the geometry of the cathedral, but as we found in Notre Dame, there will always be these things that we missed. We had so many photos, we had hundreds of photos, but that bit that you want, no one took a photo of. It's always going to be, so there's always stressing, there's always more stuff to do. Next, please. Go back one, I think we skipped. So, the first question is, do we have the trees? Because this is the question we had in France. Now, Unfortunately, in France has I think it's the lowest forested area in Europe, at 15%. And if you compared that to the managed area in France, which is 31%, do we have those trees? I think this is a question that we need to start asking. How can we prepare for these eventualities? Next one, please. And what's interesting now is, of course, we're battling climate change, and one of the things today is sustainability, and we're looking at these challenges and what our scientific communities are telling us. We need to start using our land better to support the population that we have. And they're saying, moving away from a diet, for example, heavy in animal products, is going to help us start to give back area that will help us to have those forests again, and to start, tackling climate change. And this photo is from where I live in France at the moment, and this is where I live, and that's more like what 75% looks like, which is kind of a target that we can all, every little thing that we do can start to move towards those actions. Next, please. And we're really lucky in Wales, and as you'll find here, there are some absolutely incredible people about doing amazing things. I've been inspired by one of my friends, Keith, whose project is called Stump Up for Trees, and he's planted over 320,000 trees. But he was telling me that it's not about just trees, it's about creating habitat. And for local communities, it's about helping farmers on that transition, because we are all in it together. It doesn't matter what we're doing, all of us are doing that bit, working together, whether it's planting our trees, building our building, learning those skills. Next, please. Okay, can we do it? In Wales, outstandingly, yes, we can. We have the skills here. We have centres like the Towie Centre. We have incredible teachers like Alan Ritchie. We have members in the Carpenters Fellowship, an UK organisation. We have, just across the border, we have Charpentiers Sans Frontières, Carpenters Without Borders, who work everywhere. We have obsessed carpenters from the States in the Timbers Framers Guild who will go anywhere, and they are really obsessed. And we have all these people who have those skills, and not only that, they really want to share them. Next, please. So, with that in mind, here is Notre Dame as it stands today. This photo was taken about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and here you can see it. And just to walk in it again, and it is reborn. And we're trying, when you look closer, you have all the marks the same. It's just, working on a project like this, there's just nothing like it. Words are failing me now. Okay, next please. So, just a summary. I think if a disaster like that were to happen in Wales, or in the UK, we can think towards the future. The things that we're doing for sustainability, like our food, like planting trees, are going to help us for those long-term goals, to prepare us for the future. But I think it's more than that. I think it's more than just planting those physical seeds. I think it's planting those ideas in people's heads, to show that to each of us, that these ideas, if we come together, these things are possible. But as craftspeople, as parents, as individuals, we can show children now, and so many people of the younger generation, they're fed up. They want to make things. They want to do things. And we have that responsibility and that knowledge to share those skills so they can make something absolutely incredible for their grandchildren, for their great-grandchildren. That's the end. Thank you very much.